So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Don. Good to be here.
It's good to have you on from when we met. It must be a couple of years ago now at the UK True Crime Awards, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Met you and Kathy, and that was the first time we heard about your podcast. So can you just tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. No, thanks for having me on, Don. It's good to be here. Good to be back. So my wife, Kathy, and I, we run a YouTube channel called Just Thought Lounge, where we put on mini true crime documentaries that kind of range from 20 to 40-ish minutes. I think our longest one is 50 minutes. We post every Sunday at about 6 o'clock BST currently. And we've been running the channel for a couple years now, probably, I guess going on about 3 years now. Got a little over 100 videos, and we are, news to you, we are just about to pass 300,000 subscribers. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, big milestone coming up. So we should be passing that any day now.
That's huge. I mean, I've just watched you when we first met you. You were already flying high, and I've just watched you grow and grow. You're doing amazing. It's a fantastic podcast, though. I mean, the work that goes into it, you can see. I love your setup, but you have to go and everybody that hasn't watched it, go and watch on YouTube. It's beautiful. You've worked hard to get that, haven't you?
I appreciate it. Hey, right place, right time with a little bit of work, and we're getting lucky. So I appreciate that.
It's not lucky. Luck, okay, but you've worked hard. You've got beautiful, silky smooth voice. You're perfect. Like I say, I love your setup as well. And you've changed the logo. It's animated logo, and it's really clever. I remember saying that to you. It's just all these little touches just make it beautiful.
Animated logo, and if you haven't seen one recently, Don, so the last couple episodes, just to kind of, talking about always growing and learning, we had someone come in and help us with our lighting setup because we realized, or we had a feeling that our lighting could be improved, and it has been. So check out our last couple episodes, and you'll see a stark difference between what we had been doing and what we're looking at going forward. So trying to improve a little bit every week and just kind of learn and grow.
That's amazing. Because I remember you told us when we met you, all these lightings you'd put in.
Yeah.
Because you told us your setup, because we looked at it and we're like, what do you do? So you've even improved on that. That's impressive.
Yeah. We bought a lot of lighting setups we've gone through. So I think we're getting there. Still, work to do, always room to improve, but we've come a long way in 3 years, definitely.
No, you definitely have.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Turn your dial to find the frequency of the past.
Captain Advice.
Where the classic stories of mysteries, sci-fi, thrillers, and suspense are found waiting to be heard once again.
Another case for Nick Carter, Master Detective.
You'll find a variety of those stories here, in their original form, where each episode takes you to another place or time.
The Man of Bronze, Doc Savage.
But only when you find the mystery frequency. Available everywhere.
The shadow knows.
Are you tired of hearing about the Ted Bundys and Jeffrey Dahmers on True Crime podcasts? I thought so. We've got something just for you. I'm Pat.
And I'm Darcy, and we are the hosts of Pod of Terror, a true crime podcast that dives into lesser-known cases from around the world.
Grab a glass of wine and join us every Thursday as we discuss the most vile, despicable human beings on the planet.
It'll be a dark and twisted journey, so don't forget your drink. You're gonna need it.
We're looking forward to seeing you next Thursday.
So it was you that, we've been in touch quite a while, but you mentioned to me about the Tony Parsons case and covering that together, which I'd heard of when Tony went missing.
Okay.
Back in 2017. And sadly, I hadn't followed the case, so I hadn't known that there was an outcome. I remember just thinking, God, what happened to him? He just disappeared for so long.
So you had heard of this just organically in the news, yeah?
Yep, correct.
Okay. Was it a big deal? Was it a big deal up there? Yeah.
It was. I mean, it was everywhere. I remember at the time, and I remember, it was all in all the papers, and he just disappeared. it just disappeared. I mean, I remember thinking did he go climbing? He didn't know what was going on. I know he wasn't a bike ride,
Mm-hmm.
but how can you just disappear? So it was just a mystery for so long. And then it just sadly, as everything does, when there's no resolution, it fades out of people's minds, out of the newspapers.
Sure.
And I hadn't seen that there was a resolution. So I was grateful that you put me back onto it. So yeah.
All right. And that's the podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
So, like I said, this started off as a missing person inquiry back on before when we found out about it, it was the 2nd of October 2017. But it started back on the 29th of September 2017 when 63-year-old Anthony Tony Parsons was seen for the last time when he was attempting a solo charity bike ride. And he decided to do this because he'd been battling prostate cancer, which he was diagnosed with in 2010, and he just wanted to give something back. So he was doing this charity bike ride, which would cover 104 miles or 167 kilometres, and it would be from Fort William to Tillicountry.
So the cycle from Fort William to Tillicountry, was that a one-day cycle? Do you know if he was trying to do that in one day?
Yes, he was. He was wanting to make it back home.
Okay. Yeah, because what I was surprised was when he landed there, what time he was starting that cycle at, because I think it was late in the evening. And then he was, I guess, cycling through the evening.
It was, because he left his family home about 9:30 in the morning, and he got the train from Tillicountry to Fort William, arriving there about 4:10. So it was quite late in the day to kind of start that. But yes, he didn't, he wanted to get home, which we'll find out later. Fort William is located in the west coast of Scotland, about a 2.5-hour drive northwest of Glasgow, and Tillicountry is about a 45-minute drive northeast of Glasgow. So he left Fort William and he started cycling south on the A82. About 5 o'clock, he texted his wife just to say, he'd arrived in Fort William and just to ask how she was doing. And then he passed through the village of Glencoe about 6 o'clock, still heading south on the A82 in the direction of Tyndrum. And then he disappeared about 11:30 outside the Bridge of Orchy Hotel, which is about 40 miles or 64 kilometres southeast of Fort William. But the reason we know that he was going to keep going is because he went into the hotel at that time for a cup of coffee just to warm up, because it was a really bad night. It was cold, it was wet, it was just a miserable, horrible night. So he went in there to get something to eat, something to drink. And the owner of the hotel actually tried to persuade Tony to rent a room for the night because it was so bad. But Tony was, no, I want to get home. I'm going to keep going. And he left the hotel. And that was the last time he was seen alive.
Yeah. So last time at Bridge of Orchy, and looking at, so he didn't make it too far in the ride. I pulled up a little map to just kind of familiarize myself with the path that he would have been taking. And Bridge of Orchy, it looks like it's about maybe a third of the way along the path. But yeah, like we were saying, a third of the way, it's about a 9-10 hour bike ride, it would seem. To be starting that and then going through the night to get back home is a pretty impressive endeavor to take on in and of itself, right? Just kind of navigating those roads. So I'm sure once he didn't show up, the family would have been pretty concerned, considering driving through the Highlands late at night, low visibility, who knows what can go on out there. But yeah, he just kind of vanished at Bridge of Orchy.
And to do it by himself as well. And I still don't understand why he did it so late in the day, because yes, like you said, it's going to be 9 hours, so he must have been prepared to do it through the night in the dark, which, up there it's very secluded, it's very isolated. I wouldn't fancy it, especially in the bad weather.
Yeah, and that's why I was wondering if he was actually planning on splitting it into two, right? Like maybe trying to get halfway through, call it a night at midnight, wake up early in the morning, and then continue on. But yeah, I didn't see anywhere that sort of said he was or wasn't. I didn't come across that. But yeah, either way, very, very treacherous roads, I think, to be going through at that time, solo on a bike.
Definitely. And there was no easy equipment. He didn't have any tents with him. Okay, he was at the Bridge of Orchy, but, if he was going to stop somewhere just at the side of the road, he had no equipment to do that, and it was cold.
No equipment. And I read one quote from someone at the pub there that had asked him to stay. And they said, it's cold and it's raining, it's late. Why don't you just rent a room, And he said, this is for charity and it's supposed to be a challenge, right? This isn't meant to be easy. This is meant to be something that you have to put effort into and really power through. So I think that was sort of his mentality too, was, hey, people with cancer are going through, as he knows, as being a survivor himself, are going through these difficult times. And this is what he wants to do with his ride is live in that spirit.
Oh, that's sad. Because he was determined to do that. It obviously meant a lot to him then to give back after he'd fought. Well, that's even sadder. So a little bit about Tony's his family then, because obviously he didn't come home. Mobile reception up there is a bit patchy. So maybe they wouldn't have been overly concerned. Maybe they thought when he didn't appear home in the early hours of the morning, maybe they thought he had stayed, and maybe they just gave it a little bit of time in case he came home. But by the Monday, the 2nd of October, he still wasn't home, and the missing person inquiry was launched. So Tony he obviously left his wife, he was a dad, he was a granddad, and he loved spending time with his grandchildren. He liked taking his grandson fishing. He was a former Navy officer and he loved sports. He spent a lot of time doing rugby, refereeing it, playing it, coaching it, and he enjoyed golf. So he was quite an active person. It wasn't as if he would find this too challenging. He obviously was quite an active, sporty person. So, he could do it.
No, yeah. It didn't seem like it was going to be... It's something that he's used to doing, right? And it's something that he's physically active. So I'm sure the family wasn't too concerned initially, right, with him being out there. I'm sure there's always concern, but just doing a 100-mile bike ride for him seems like it was something that wasn't too much of a stretch.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if I would have waited until the Monday, but I don't know what they were doing. They might have been waiting for him to phone. They might have actually driven up the route and trying to find him. They might have phoned the hospital. I don't know what they were doing, but it was Monday the 2nd of October before they reported him missing. But the appeal started by the police. His son, Mike, went on Crime Watch, the BBC's Crime Watch, appealing for information. It was the not knowing. He just disappeared, Kevin.
Yeah.
He just disappeared. I mean, I know it's a vast space up there. That's why I thought, was he climbing up the mountains? Was he doing something? That's why I thought, how can he just disappear off the road? What on earth happened to him?
And you're right, and that's the strange part of the story, right? Is you hear about people going missing in the Highlands, or you hear about people going missing out hiking or in the wilderness. So yes, he was in that environment, but he was on a road, right? He wasn't off road. He wasn't camping. He wasn't doing anything that should have taken him off of that roadway. Now, I suppose there's still quite a long stretch of road up there, kind of connecting the two, the 100-ish miles. If he had gotten into trouble or had gotten into an accident, just even going a few feet off of the road would be difficult to find someone, I would assume, in that large of a space to cover. So it would be tough, even if he was trying to stick to the road. It could be hard to find him in that sort of environment.
Of course it could. And then obviously, it was so late at night, 11:30,
Sure.
there wouldn't have been a lot of traffic about. So it's knowing how much further did he get along the road? Where do you even start looking? So it's just, it's like a needle in a haystack.
How's the lighting up there, Don? When it's dark, is it just kind of pitch black other than the stars? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's bad up there. It's just vast. There's no houses. It's just nothingness. I mean, I would be frightened doing that by myself. So good for him. So at this time, Tony was described as being 5'9" tall, stocky build with short greying hair, a moustache. He wore glasses. He had an anchor tattoo on his upper right arm, an eagle tattoo on his left arm, and he was last seen wearing a distinctive red waterproof jacket. He was wearing a blue long-sleeved cycling top, a high-vis vest, so he should have been easy to spot, fingerless gloves, beige combat trousers, a silver and grey cycling helmet, and walking boots. And he was carrying a silver and blue rucksack and had a yellow framed bike with black handlebars. So lots of detail, lots of, obviously the police and the Coast Guard and Mountain Rescue, they started searching for him. They were stopping traffic, they were speaking to locals.
Yeah, and they started, or they were centering their search around the bar that he was last seen at, right? And that was that the bridge of Orkey?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bridge of Orkey. So they centered around there. They knew that he was there, right? They knew that he had left. And as you mentioned, there's not a lot necessarily going on in that area. So that would be their best hope to actually find a lead. And so they went to that pub, asked the locals that were there. There was a hunting party going on that night at that pub. So they talked to everyone that was included in that hunting party, everyone that they could contact, and no one saw anything. No one had any information about what had happened to Tony.
There was nothing. the 7th of October came along, and the police made another statement saying that obviously they were growing increasingly concerned for his welfare. The large-scale search continued. They were asking people to check the gardens, the locals to check the gardens, their outhouses, anything, just in case he'd, hurt himself or wandered off to get shelter and something had happened. So nothing. 17th of October came along, 17 days after he was reported missing, and still speaking to residents. They were still stopping people. They were urging the motorists who'd been travelling on the evening of the 29th just to get in touch. It was just a dead end. It must have been so frustrating.
Yeah, it's a dead end. And as as it happens so often with these cases and with these stories, is the first few days, weeks, hours are the most critical, right? To find anything or to find a lead. And as time goes, the hope of finding someone out there, it slowly slips away. And what ends up happening are people and the locals that are initially out and looking and concerned, they also start to kind of move on, right? And that's got to be devastating for the family to know that their husband and father and grandfather is lost out there somewhere, clearly lost out there somewhere, not getting any answers, no one seeing anything, and the slowly slipping out of the public sort of mindset, and that whole instance has to just kind of be gutting to see that slip away.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened with me. I remember the big furore over it all, and then yes, gradually it did slip away, and sadly that was it. It wasn't until 2020, October 2020 was the next time. Well, the family were making appeals. I think they were making appeals every year, but the next time it was made a big deal of was October 2020. They spoke in the paper just saying that they'd never dreamed that this would be the last time they'd see their dad when he was just going on a charity ride. It was just left with so many unanswered questions, and obviously they couldn't move on, they couldn't do anything, and the special occasions were passing and he wasn't there and nobody knew why. Losing somebody must be horrendous, but losing somebody and not knowing why or how,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that must really mess with your head.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In 2021, the family did start to get answers. I don't know whether it's nice to know this either, but the 12th of January 2021, Tony's remains were found not far from Bridge of Orchy. It was near a farmhouse on a farmland. It was many, many acres of farmland, and his remains were found there. Shall we go back a little bit?
Yeah, so if we step back a little bit to late 2020, the police were contacted by someone that claimed to have some information about what happened with Tony in this missing persons case. So that person that came forward, her name was Caroline Muirhead, and she told police that I know, or I have some information. And the story that Caroline ends up telling them is surprising to say the least, right?
Yeah.
And Caroline was in a new relationship with a gentleman named Alexander McKellar, and she had just met Alexander, I think a few weeks, 5 or 6 weeks prior to that.
Yeah, 5
on
weeks,
Tinder,
yeah.
And they had started dating, and the relationship had started to develop quickly, and they were already talking about marriage and their future together and what that was going to look like. And Caroline, excited as she would be, is talking to Alexander about, hey, is there anything in your life that I should know about that is going to impact us in the future? And Alexander he had been drinking. He was a drinker, and he had been drinking, and he told her sort of out of the blue, hey, something terrible happened here. And they were driving in the area where Tony had gone missing, where they both lived or were residing at the time, and said, hey, something terrible had happened here. 3 years ago, my brother and I hit a cyclist, and killed him and disposed of his body.
Can you imagine?
No, and that's, from the person that has just proposed to you, your new fiance that you've known for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she was just probing for something like, oh, I've got a crazy ex-girlfriend, or, I've got, I've got a kid somewhere, or something like that. But then to come out with, my brother and I killed someone and hid their body would have just been shocking, right? And that's what she went to the police with and told the police about.
She found this out, and it was at the end of November, but she waited till the end of December because she tried to get as much information as she could in that month, including where they'd actually buried Tony's body. he'd actually taken her there and she'd left a can of Red Bull. She dropped it there, hadn't she, so that she'd be able to direct the police to where his body was.
Yeah, it was pretty clever, right?
It was really good of her. She got that. However, you would think that was Caroline's role over. However, it wasn't, was it?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, the very clever of her to do that Red Bull, and you're right. She was driving when this conversation initially happened, and he told her to pull over and to give him her keys and her phone. And that's when she was, scared for her life, right? Like, what is this man going to do?
Well, yeah.
I've only known him
Yeah.
for a few weeks, and we're in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
He's telling me to pull over, and now he tells me this story, and we're still in the middle of nowhere. Is he going to regret telling me this, right? And then you're right. She actually goes back home with him, and she says that she was in bed with Alexander, and he had fallen asleep, and she was terrified and awake and on her phone looking up missing persons and missing cyclists from the area to try to validate the story. And then that's when she found Tony. And then she started, to your point, spending those next few weeks trying to gather some evidence and coming up with the idea of, I can't just go with him telling me this drunkenly, right? Like, how do I get some actual evidence, some actual proof? And the Red Bull can that you mentioned is really interesting because it's a separate occasion where they're in the car together. There's video of it, actually, where Caroline is recording herself and they're in the car. You can see Alexander driving and she's in the passenger seat. And they're in the car driving, presumably to this location where the body's buried. And she's drinking the Red Bull, right? And she's got it in screen. Now, I don't know. I'm making assumptions that it's the same Red Bull. It wasn't clear that it was. Maybe she just really enjoys Red Bull and she drinks Red Bull everywhere she goes. Possible. But the connection that I'm making, at least, is that they're driving out to this area. She knows that she needs proof. She's showing the Red Bull on the video so that when she gets out to the gravesite, she can leave it, discreetly leave it so that Alexander doesn't see, and then be able to tell police, hey, this is it. This is the Red Bull. This is the Red Bull I was drinking. This was the whole plan. And then that's kind of what she went to the police with in late December.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible that she did that. I mean, she needs to be commended for taking that time to do that. Like you said, she would have been terrified, not knowing, he was capable of that. Mm-hmm. What else was he capable of? So that was really incredible that she did that for the family, really, because otherwise he wouldn't have been found, would he?
But she wasn't commended, was she?
No, she wasn't commended, which is kind of sad. She should have been treated a lot better than she was.
Mm-hmm.
So the two brothers that were in the car, they were 29 years old, and they were Alexander and Robert McKellar, and they lived and worked at the Och farm and estate with their family. And they had actually been, like you said, at the Bridge of Orkney that night at the hunting party.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd left, obviously, after Tony had left, and they met him on the road. They didn't see him. They were both drunk. And it wasn't the first time that Alexander McKellar had been charged with dangerous driving, drunk driving. It had been numerous times. And here he was again. And he actually sent getting ahead of myself, but he actually sent his girlfriend at the time, not Caroline, a text that later that night saying that he'd, hun, I've hit a deer with Robert's car tonight. Last thing I could, I didn't need that. It's the last thing I needed. So they were spoken to. So I just wonder why there was no correlation at the time. Did maybe the girlfriend at that time not come forward, not put two and two together? And the car was fixed as well, wasn't it? Costing about £3,000 or something like that. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we know what happened. Well, from what Caroline said, we know what happened that fateful night then, don't we?
Yeah. And then just a few days later, after that, they were actually arrested, weren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When she came forward, they were arrested.
Yep.
And then released a couple of days later while the investigation continued.
I was trying to find some more information on this or to make sense of it. And I don't know if you've got any view here, Don. So Caroline was told in November 2020. She spent a few weeks to December before she went to the police and told the police her story. The brothers get arrested. They get bailed out and they're free. Caroline's, from what I could find, Caroline's investigation lasted 9 months.
Yeah.
So she was still living with the brothers and recording conversations and gathering information for the police for 9 months after presumably they knew that she had told the police, or did they not know how the police knew what happened? That they didn't connect those dots.
I'm assuming that the police, they couldn't have told Alexander and Robert how they knew this information. They couldn't have told them that it was Caroline, because why would they allow her back in for the next 9 months to stay with them?
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. That I agree with that. So they can't have known, they can't have realised that it was Caroline.
Maybe, and maybe they just didn't piece it together, but it's been 3 years. They've gotten away with it for all intents and purposes. No one has any idea. Tony Parsons' story is fading, right? Or if not, has already faded from sort of, the public spotlight. And Alexander tells his fiance, hey, we killed someone, drives her out to where he was buried, and then a few days later, they're arrested. How do they not piece that together? How do they not? And at some point, even maybe not right away, but at some point, they would just think, hey, maybe it was Caroline and maybe we shouldn't trust her. And she's out there living with them in the middle of nowhere on their estate, right?
In the middle of nowhere. Yeah. You wonder if maybe Alexander didn't tell his brother that he told Caroline. So maybe Robert's maybe unaware, and then Caroline does an amazing job of convincing Alexander that it wasn't nothing to do with her, and he's just believed her. Maybe she said, you told me that a month ago, I'd keep your secret. You never know what. She had no choice, did she? She was told by the police. She was threatened by the police that she had to do this. So she really had no choice. So she was fighting for her life at that point, really, because if he found out, then God knows what he would have done.
Yep. And the things that the police were doing to her, right? Like you said, being threatened by the police, and like we touched on earlier, this is something she should have been commended for, right? Like she took this onto herself and went to find this evidence and find where the burial site was, and bring that to the police. And what do the police do? They turn around and say, hey, you need to cooperate with us, or you're going to be charged, right? You're going to be charged with aiding and abetting and, after the fact sort of charges.
Yep.
So she's really stuck between a rock and a hard place, isn't she?
Yeah, they were bad. She said there was just hostility straight away. There was no thought about her mental health or what she was going to have to, what they were asking her to do, what she'd been through. It wasn't their finest hour, I don't think.
No, definitely not.
But also all this is going on behind the scenes. We're, as the public, we're not aware of this. January comes and we find out that Tony's remains have been found. But at that point, I remember when reading it, I was thinking, I always want to know, well, why? Who's suddenly come forward? What have they found? So we're left not knowing until September that year, really, until the prosecution have built their case. They can bring it forward to the courts. And it's at that point we find out about what Caroline's done. We find out about the two boys, and we find out exactly what happened to Tony that night. So, as we know, Tony was at the Bridge of Orchy Hotel. He left at 11:30 that night. And along the road he went, and merrily on the A82, heading home. And Alexander and Robert were in the Bridge of Orchy as well, and they were drinking, and they got into their car. They got into Robert's car, but Alexander was driving. Robert was in the passenger seat. They were both intoxicated, and Alexander was driving at speed, and he didn't see Tony, and he hit him. He seriously injured him, knocked him off his bike. They got out of the car, and they saw that obviously Tony was in a bad way, and they left him. They went back to the nearby where they stayed, the Orchy estate, the farmhouse. They changed cars. They got into a pickup truck that they had. They went back. They hauled Tony's body into the pickup truck with his bike and his belongings, took him back to the farm, and they placed him in wooded area near the farm, just under tarpaulin or such like, for the night. At this point, Tony would have still been alive. He was believed to have been still alive for at least 20 to 30 minutes. So they left him there overnight. And in the morning, they went to, it was a shooting party they went to that morning. They went to something that morning as well. Yeah. And then when they came back, they got Tony's body, and they took it to a different part of the estate that was used to deposit dead animals, a PT area. They dug a grave, they placed Tony in the grave, they threw bleach over his body, and then threw animal remains over his body, and then filled the hole They took £60 from his wallet, and then they burned the wallet, his backpack, his helmet, destroyed his phone and the SIM card, and then hid his bike near a waterfall.
Yeah.
So that's what they did.
That's what they did. And a couple things in there that, are interesting. I think one, the fact that you're right, they hit Tony and then they went to swap cars, right? They continued on to their estate or their home where they were staying to swap cars. And what they did that was pretty clever of them was they dropped their cell phones there, right?
Yeah.
So they drove. So if anyone were to track their cell phone data or, their location, it would just show that they just drove from the bar all the way home, and then they were at home for the evening, right? So they left their phones there, got in their other truck, and drove back to dispose of Tony and do, the rest of what you just shared with Tony's body. So clever from that point. And the other thing that is really worth calling out and talking about is how you mentioned that Tony was likely alive for 20 to 30 minutes afterwards. So he got hit. They hit him and left him on the side of the road, fractured ribs, fractured pelvis, potentially a collapsed lung, and having trouble breathing. I think it was the fractured rib that they believed was likely the cause of death, even though that cause of death was 30 minutes after being hit. So he is in pain, struggling to breathe on the side of the road, and these brothers just drive away, come back, pick him up, and then just leave him overnight while they go to a shooting party the next day before continuing on with their plan. Is just awful to think about. And I don't know if you came across this. I'm sure you did, Don, but him being alive for 20 to 30 minutes, they did say that where they were, it was so remote that emergency services would have taken at least an hour or about an hour to get out there. Not to say that is obviously justifying or saying one thing or the other about anything that happened, but just to kind of show how remote they were, that it would have taken an hour to get there. So Tony was in a bad spot either way.
Yeah, he was. But yes, you said that they were clever to leave their phones at their house when they went back to pick up Tony. But what they said in their defense later was that they panicked. But I mean, that doesn't sound like somebody that's panicked. That's quite calculating.
That sounds methodical.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. That sounds like they've, potentially even thought about this before, about what would we do if something happened. We would, put any evidence at the waterfall, bury them where all the animals go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not panicked. That's the opposite of panicked, I would say.
Yeah. And that's when I said that, the family, yes, they had their answers, but then they now know that their loved one was left at the side of the road by himself in pain for 20 to 30 minutes. And yes, okay, they might not have got to him in time, but if they'd done the right thing, he would have been with somebody, wouldn't he? He wouldn't have been on his
absolutely.
own.
Yeah.
So that kind of got to me a little bit as well. So yes, now we know, we think we know who did it. We know what happened. We think we know what happened, allegedly. So then they are charged with murdering Tony, which they deny, and they offer instead to plead guilty to driving offences and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. So obviously that plea was rejected, and a trial date was set for July 2023 at the High Court in Glasgow. But before the trial can go ahead, Alexander McKellar actually pleads guilty to the reduced charge of culpable homicide, and it's accepted. And Robert McKellar, he pleads still not guilty to murder, but they both accept that they attempted to defeat the ends of justice. The family, when this is heard at the court, that Tony's family do feel that they've received justice, but it's alluded to afterwards, which I know we'll get into in a little bit more detail, that because of what happened to Caroline, which we'll talk about, it's possibly why they had to accept the lesser charge. So I'm curious more about your thoughts of that when we get to it, whether they shot themselves in the foot, the police shot themselves in the foot the way they treated Caroline, and they had to go for this lesser charge.
Yeah.
Which is because, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I completely agree, right? I think the police did shoot themselves in the foot because the way that the investigation was handled and the way that this crime, played out, the fact that what they pled down to, 12 years for one and 5 years for the other, right?
Yeah.
Is just not enough, right? Just not enough for everything that we just went through and everything that they know happened. Those sentences just, it doesn't match the crime. And so it's, why did that happen, right? Like, why did they have to offer a plea, and what was stopping them from going to trial and getting maximum sentence? And the answer is what happened with Caroline, right? Caroline was going through, leading up to the trial, she was going through months of police harassment, not police harassment, but police,
Pressure.
police pressure.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Police pressure, stress with dealing with the brothers, and just really struggling with her own mental state, to the point where the trial was coming up, and she was told, oh, and actually, before we get to the trial, one interesting instance that happened leading up to, through the investigation, was Caroline's being told this whole time by police that she can't tell anyone about this, right? She can't tell her family, she can't tell her friends, because it's going to impact the investigation, right? It could impact the investigation. So she's living this on her own, with these two killers that she knows are killers. She can't talk to anyone else.
And she's not even allowed to seek any mental health support because, again, they've denied her that, saying it could compromise the case. So she's on her own.
Yeah. She can't seek mental health support. She's on her own there. She had to leave her job because she was a forensic pathologist. And they said, now that you're part of a criminal case, you can't still be working for the police department in that capacity because it's a conflict of interest. So she leaves her job. She's isolated mentally from her family because she can't tell them what's going on. She's stuck with these killers. And then what ends up coming out is she goes to a pub in town. I don't know if it was the Bridge of Orkney, if it was the same pub. Probably was, if it was in this area. But she goes to a pub, and the bartender tells her, hey, do you want a Red Bull, sugar-free, just like the gravesite?
Oh, I didn't know that. Ooh.
Yeah, so she hears that, and she now knows that information is being leaked. So she can't say anything, but the police, their investigation is clearly leaking information out, right? And things are getting around. But now she's terrified because she's still living with these two brothers, right? She's still these brothers are not in prison. They're not in jail. So if word gets out that she's the one that has told the police about what they did and has caused and is driving this investigation that I guess they don't know is happening, but they could get wind that this investigation is happening. So all of this is brewing on Caroline, right? Like, she is mentally exhausted and can't get through what is happening. The trial is coming up, and then she learns that for the trial, the judge has allowed a BBC documentary crew to come in and film it. And she says, nope, I do not want to be part of that. I do not want to be on film going through this, testifying against them, and have it, in this film. I just do not want to do that. And the police pressure her more, right? And say, like, you have to do it. You have to do it. You could be charged, et cetera, et cetera. And Caroline ends up fleeing, doesn't she?
Yeah, on the day of the trial, when it's she's supposed to turn up to the trial to give evidence. Then the police have promised her anonymity, but obviously she's not going to get that. They did say that they would offer to change her voice and, hide her appearance, but by this point, she's just on her knees. She's just had so much pressure put on her. So yes, she flees, she runs away, but she gets a warrant put out for her arrest, doesn't she? And a helicopter goes and finds her.
Yeah. So they find her, they place her under arrest, don't they? And then she goes, so she's actually in custody for a couple days, where, again, just everything building up. She says that she suffered a mental breakdown while she was in custody. And all of that just led to the trial not being able to proceed as initially planned. They lost their key witness in this whole thing, and that's inevitably what led to these very, in my opinion, very lenient plea deals for both of the brothers.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. I was wondering what you thought about that. And obviously we know in America, court cases are recorded quite a lot, and we have started to do it in Scotland periodically since about the 90s. But in cases like this, do you think If the people are saying, no, we don't want to be put under pressure, we want anonymity, we don't want to be part of it, is it somebody's responsibility to not put that pressure on people and to just say, no, you can't record? I mean, somebody's also saying that the BBC should have really been urged to look at their documentary making as well and the recording. Should they have maybe pulled the plug when this was going on, when they realised that she was having a problem?
Yeah, it's tough, right? I get the interest in having transparency with the courts and, being able to see trials be available. I don't want to say necessarily televised, and you think back on big ones like O.J. Simpson and things like that, where it turns into a bit of a circus, or the Amber Heard and, those things, right?
Yeah.
But I get the desire to have them documented, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that trumps the importance of protecting witnesses, especially in a case, like this, where they could feel like they are in danger. They feel like they are being harassed from the general public already. Like we talked about that one story about her going into the bar and the Red Bull and the bartender mentioning the Red Bull can. But that wasn't the only instance that she had alleged, right? She said that she was getting basically harassed by other people in the town for one reason or another. I'm not sure if they were protecting the brothers, if they just don't appreciate people working with the police. Like, I don't know what was actually driving that sort of public response, but she was definitely feeling that she couldn't live in her community because of what was going on. So I get her wanting to remain anonymous, right? At least in the trial. And I think the courts should have agreed to that. And, to your point, if they're willing to mask her voice and blur her face out, then that should be enough, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
she should have to go in and tell her story and give the statements to put these people away, and not just say, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. If they're putting those safety measures in place, I feel like that is sufficient enough. You don't have to say bar all cameras, but you do have to protect the people that are potentially further victims.
Yeah, I think that by the time they offered her, change your voice and mask your appearance, I think she was having her break. She was on the verge of a breakdown. I think she just had enough. There was no rational thought going into when she ran away. It was just panic.
So what I didn't understand maybe fully, I'm not an expert on any of this.
Mm-hmm.
I just like to talk about it. What I didn't understand fully was they knew where the body was, right? They found the body. They had the bicycle, right? They found his bike in the waterfall. They had the evidence of them getting their car repaired, the text message that you said, that Alexander had sent to his previous girlfriend about, hey, I hit a deer. Oh, this is all I need, on the night when Tony went missing. They have all those things. Presumably, they have a bunch of recordings and everything from the 9 months that Caroline was working with them. Is that all inadmissible if Caroline isn't speaking to it? Like, is that just all out the window because they don't have that one witness to say, to give a firsthand account of what was going on?
Yeah, I thought exactly the same myself. It definitely said in the newspapers that the reduced charge was directly linked to Caroline not being at the trial, and that without Caroline they had nothing. And I did think, well, do you have nothing? So yeah, like you, yes, they've got all this information. Is it because it's all hearsay if it's Caroline's not actually there saying it herself? Is it just maybe that isn't admissible? But it's something that I was curious about as well. I wonder, because it's so much. But do they have anything directly linking the boys to Tony? Maybe that's what they don't have. Maybe it is all the recordings and hearsay from Caroline. That's the only thing I could think of.
Well, and how scary is that too, right? So let's put that into perspective of everything hinges on Caroline. This 9-month operation that she's done these recordings, that she's found evidence, they've done all of these different operations, all hinge on Caroline. And if she doesn't cooperate, it's all gone. Now, put that into the perspective of Caroline. And what if she just disappeared, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, going back to that, if they had a feeling that she was doing this and the brothers took her out and she, they put her somewhere on their 9,000 acres or however big that estate is, and she was never found, are they just free to go then? Yeah. Like, do they just say, oh, forget all the Tony Parsons stuff. Caroline is gone and we have no evidence on you against Caroline. So, well, I guess maybe at that point, but it would be the plea deal, right? Like they didn't get away scot-free because Caroline didn't testify. They did have a plea deal, but clearly it was a lenient plea deal and not the maximum sentence. So I guess at that point it's, somewhere in the middle. They must have just needed to go for the plea deal to not have that ambiguity of going to trial. And
because it's beyond a reasonable doubt, isn't it? And if it goes to trial, could a jury 100% categorically say that they did it? Yes, they've got all the footage and them saying it, but if they don't have anything that directly links them to being there and putting Tony in the ground, then they can't find them guilty. So it's better for the police to go that way rather than take the chance. But knowing that, should they not have treated Caroline in a totally different way from the beginning, knowing that everything hinged on Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%, right? 100%. Yeah, it would be interesting to know what led, what kind of led to that. Why did they feel the need to treat her that way when she was very clearly not involved and had only known these brothers for less than a couple months?
Yeah.
She wasn't a longtime girlfriend. She wasn't, a longtime family member. She had met him on Tinder 2 months ago, and now she's just pulled into this whole thing.
Yeah, and why would they threaten her with being, an accomplice, or being part of it, being involved in it? It's like, well, I wasn't even around then. If I had been in that position, I would have been frightened into doing what they wanted as well, because it's the police, isn't it? You'd hope that they'd be on your side, but they weren't. But she has actually made, after the trial, whatever it was, the court hearing, she did make 8 complaints. There was dozens of complaints, but they took 8. They accepted 8 of them. So there is an ongoing investigation by the police watchdog. But that was in August 2023, and there's been nothing else. Nothing.
I'm sure they'll take some time to kind of work through, right, as they will. And hopefully something comes of it. Hopefully there's some conclusions that kind of come out, and for Caroline's sake, some sort of resolution or at least reassurance for her, given the light sentences when these guys get out of prison.
Yes. I mean, I feel sorry for Tony's family. I mean, they were gracious enough to say that they felt that justice had been served, but I guess it's not going to bring Tony back regardless. So they wanted answers and they got it. So for them, I guess it's over.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not great outcome.
No, not a great outcome. Quite the mystery for a few years. And and as you say, it's at the very least, Tony's family got some answers and, could put him to rest, which is a small consolation, I think.
His funeral was in April. So like they said, yes, they had their answers. They were able to put him to rest and finally not necessarily move on, but start living their lives again. Now they had their answers.
Yep.
And that's it. That was quite a tricky one, Kevin, I have to say.
Yeah.
I found that one quite tough in parts. And I'm busy always saying to everybody, no, I don't have any feelings, but turns out
need to crack that shell a little bit.
After all.
Yeah.
I think it was the fact he was alone. He was left alone to die. I mean, maybe not think about that too much.
you're in the wrong line of work to dwell on that too much, I think.
No, I am. I'll let that one go. But it's been really nice doing that one with you. It's nice to have somebody to talk to about these things, and we haven't got the answers to all of our questions, but it's nice to kind of bounce them off other people, isn't it?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just kind of run through and get some different thoughts, because we spend so much time doing this that, I do it with Kathy all the time, obviously, but it's nice to get some outside perspective and just kind of hash through. So I appreciate you having me on and accepting this case, and maybe next time we'll do one of your choosing.
That would be fantastic.
Perfect.
I'll look
Thanks,
forward
Don.
to speaking to you again.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurinton.